Fenton, CEO and co-founder. Beautiful day in Providence, Rhode Island, and we are headed right down to Virginia to the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia, Jennifer Lawless. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm happy to.
Okay, let's go around the world. Let's go to Afghanistan. President Biden, a few weeks ago, said we're kind of in good position. We know what we're doing. And the last few days have been utter chaos in the U.S. Exit out of Afghanistan. What does this mean to the president?
Well, it's clear that the White House understands how serious a problem it is because Joe Biden came back from Camp David yesterday to address the nation in the middle of the afternoon. So that's something that's rare, and it highlights that the withdrawal has not been what the administration suggested it would be. Now, I do think there are two different dimensions here. There's the overall argument about whether troops should stay or not, and whether there's ever going to be an okay time for the United States to leave. And there, I think they've made a decent argument. People are going to disagree, reasonable people, but generally that if the Afghans are unable to sort of hold their own country and fight for the values and the culture that they have transitioned to for the last 20 years, we can't do it for them. But then there's also the practical piece. And here it looks like the United States sort of committed a series of errors and missteps. The photos from the airport of people jumping out of planes, of people trying to hold on to planes to get out of this country, the lack of visas being administered to people whose lives are in grave danger now that the Taliban has taken over, all highlight some serious blunders. Now, the good news is that it looks like the United States has resumed control of the airport and diplomatic and civilian flights out have resumed. But it's unclear how long that will be going on and how many people we're going to be able to evacuate.
Why does Clarissa Ward at CNN look far more intelligent and understanding of the situation in Afghanistan than the entire United States government?
I think it's a fair question. I also think that it's not just the United States government. We've heard from Angela Merkel. We've heard from some other world leaders who just seem to have misgauged the extent to which the Afghan people would be able to fight the Taliban. And, in some ways, you understand it. We've been there for 20 years almost. We've equipped them with the best weapons that we have. We've trained literally hundreds of thousands of people. And I think that a lot of the Western world believe that with those skills and that equipment, that's all it takes. But there are, hundreds of years of culture and of norms, and there's a religion underlying all of this. And, we didn't have that on our side. And so I think there was just a fundamental misunderstanding of the willingness of the Afghan people to step up and fight the Taliban.
Listen, the Costs of War project housed at Brown University has tracked the cost of the Iraq and the Afghan battles over the past, that was founded in 2010 and has tracked about $7 trillion of expenses and millions of lives lost. But what it didn't track was women getting to work, women being educated, a transformation in those core elements of society which aren't so easy to measure what the cost of the tank was versus hundreds of thousands of young women becoming educated and part of their society. Is that the real danger ultimately for the Biden administration, that those images of women having to retreat, young girls being forced into functionally, rape-driven marriages at age 10 and 11, that we go back to a time that is just horrifying?
I don't know, maybe. I read an account this morning of a woman who's in the parliament, who was elected within the last few years, who said that not only doesn't she know if she's going to have a job or be able to have any job, but they don't even know what form of government they're going to have. So I think everything is a big unknown right now. And the Taliban are obviously not trustworthy. They've said that they will have an inclusive government. What does inclusive mean? They've said that women can continue to go to school. What kind of school? They've also indicated that women have to be fully covered. They've indicated that women cannot leave the home without men, that they can't access medical services without men. And the villages that they've been taking over have confirmed that this, in fact, is the case, and that women are being brutally murdered when they violate those rules. So, they're speaking out of one side of their mouth and behaving completely differently. And I just think that we don't know how bad it's going to be. We do know it's going to be bad.
We in glass houses should maybe not criticize their inconsistency of their messaging, because I'm not sure in future engagements, the U.S. government's going to have a lot of credibility talking to other countries and insurgencies around the world. This is going to be a very, very tough play for American foreign policy going forward.
Well, one thing I would add, though, is that if you listen to Biden's speech yesterday, he said very explicitly that the reason that we went into Afghanistan in the first place was to stop al-Qaeda, to ultimately find Osama bin Laden, to bring him to justice. And basically, over the course of the last 20 years, the loosening of religious norms, the liberalization of the country sort of followed, but that wasn't why we went in. And so I do want to, alert all of those Americans who are so up in arms, how could we possibly be doing this and leaving the women of Afghanistan in this position, that there are women in positions like this all over the world, and we don't care about them either. And so that's not to defend this policy, but it's just to say that if you think about why we went in and whether we've accomplished our goals and whether it's time to leave, this is not that surprising given the way that the United States has conducted foreign policy and the way that it's addressed humanitarian crises across the globe for decades and decades.
Sunday night, I spoke to Paula Nerschel, who started a program to bring Afghan women over to the United States, starting about 2002, right after the U.S. invasion. And that program successfully brought over 70 women who were educated at U.S. universities, and most of them returned back for a period of time, but many are still there. Some of them are high-ranking in the Afghan, or now failed Afghan government. They are petrified. They believe that they are in grave danger and for their lives, for their families' lives. Did the Biden administration just miss the order of how to leave a country? We seem to have done an incredibly poor job in getting our closest allies, those we made absolute promises to, out of the country and into safety. Something like 2,000 have left the country to date, and we're talking about 50 to 100,000 that may be in the categories that we had an obligation to?
Yeah, I think the jury's not out on that yet, though, because we can still do this well, or if not well, we can at least still do it. There's time. We're continuing to evacuate, and it's possible that the train hasn't left the station on this dimension, but it's cleanup at this point, and it's in some ways a Hail Mary pass to get back into the airport and do everything that we possibly can to get people out. But I don't think that it's over. I don't think that the possibility of being safely evacuated, if you were an ally to us, if you're under grave danger, if you're seeking asylum, I don't think that that's over. But it is made more complicated now that the Taliban are in control. If this would have been done a month ago or 2 months ago, it obviously would have been smoother sailing. The other thing that I'll note is, the Biden administration, the United Nations, NATO, all of our allies, everybody believes, and I think genuinely so, that it's very, very important to prioritize human rights, that women's rights are human rights, that empowering girls and women is a vital way to, not only shore up social capital, but also to make sure that governments and countries adhere to, sort of common decency. I don't think that they're going to, that's not being thrown by the wayside. The question is just, how can we do that, and how can we enforce that when there's a nation that really has no interest in working with us or adopting those kinds of norms? And the challenge here is how to do it when we don't have troops on the ground to make sure that we're holding, the Afghans' feet to the fire.
Yeah, drones only go so far. But I think there was a little disingenuousness in the president's remarks yesterday. Said, if atrocities happen, human rights groups have absolutely already documented examples of atrocities by the Taliban against those who are loyal to the United States and the Afghan government. Those are piling up. You can go on Human Rights Campaign, the website, and they have example after example, some with videos. It's gruesome. And so, the president's got to be careful here on making promises. It's sounding a little Biden, a little Obama in Syria-ish. To be careful about crossing lines that Obama then never followed up on, because Syria did cross multiple lines that the Obama administration had put down. So, it's a worrisome time. The Republicans can't jump on this wildly because it was a Trump agreement, but Democrats seem to be starting to worry about what the implications of this are.
Well, in part because the Republicans don't care that it was a Trump agreement, right? So if we've learned anything from the Republicans, it's that they're willing to seize the day and turn a set of circumstances to their advantage, regardless of whether it's hypocritical, regardless of whether it was their policy to begin with. And as a result, the Democrats should be worried because the Republicans have played this game successfully before. I heard several Republicans on TV last night, all of a sudden espousing all of this concern about Afghan women and girls when they don't care at all about Afghan women or girls, when they don't care at all about U.S. women or girls. And so the ease with which they're going to be able to capitalize on this, should in fact worry Democrats.
Okay, let's change subjects. Let's go to a much more positive note. Let's go to the state of New York and Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo is out. He
allegedly.
Allegedly. Will they be dragging him out? Will troopers be dragging him out by his feet at the end of his 14 days?
I don't know. I read a piece this morning that asked for the letter of resignation. Like, it's unclear that there's a written document anywhere saying that he's actually going to leave in what is now 8 days. I think that in the last few days, he's continued to double down and explain that now he's doing the best thing he possibly can for the state, that they wouldn't actually impeach him, that it would just be driving New Yorkers through, 3 or 4 months of total chaos. I can't remember the last time, with the exception of Donald Trump, I can't remember the last time that an elected leader, sort of paid the price without acknowledging any kind of wrongdoing. And so now to sort of frame the resignation in a way that is also in his favor is just really galling and I think, appalling in the context of the allegations and these women who have been brave and have come forward.
Is Andrew Cuomo matter that he has to leave office or matter that Mayor de Blasio got the win?
I think they're both pretty high on the list. I think that over the course of the last 18 months, people across the country saw the fight taking place between the two of them. And pretty much on every dimension, Cuomo was scoring points. And so this has got to be, a little bit sweet for de Blasio, even though he says, of course, this isn't what he would want for the state. But it's bad. I also, my favorite comment in all of this was the governor-elect, Kathy Hochul, saying that, she and Cuomo are just not very close. So the extent to which elected officials are distancing themselves from Cuomo is really quite telling.
Let's jump over back to Washington and sort of the overall metamorphosis of the Biden administration. He just had the big win on, it's not done yet. Nothing's ever done in Washington, but it looks like he's going to score a win on infrastructure. And then Afghanistan blows up, and the images were just devastating they contrasted so deeply as to what the narrative the White House was saying. This wasn't going to look like Vietnam. No, it's going to look worse than Vietnam. What does this mean for the future of Joe Biden? This Afghan story is not going to end. I'll add one thing that Paula Nerschel mentioned. She said, the big difference between 2001 and 2002, when the United States entered, and the behavior of the Taliban is social media. And the one thing that the Afghan people, activists in human rights, et cetera, are hoping is that they'll be able to continue to tell their story by leveraging social media. The message will get out. They can cut off the TV stations, et cetera. But social media will allow some of the imagery and some of the storytelling to get out. That's going to plague Joe Biden over the next 2+ years of his tenure.
It could, but it could also serve as an impetus for the Biden administration to be far more active in terms of working to secure human rights and address the humanitarian aspect of this than would otherwise be the case. We've seen similar things happen in the Middle East. The Arab Spring happened in part because there was social media to accompany it. So I think it's too soon to tell whether this is ultimately going to be damning and lead to a one-term presidency. The cynical side of me says that the American people just don't care that much about what's going on outside of this country. It's rare when a foreign policy blunder that doesn't involve, the loss of U.S. life it's rare that that is sufficient to undermine an administration. But it's right, you're right. Social media could change those things. I think a lot of it also has to do with whether this is sort of a one-off in terms of competence, or whether this begins a series of examples of an incompetent administration. Now, up till this point, the Biden administration has been seen as quite competent on both domestic and foreign policy issues. If this had happened under George W. Bush or under Donald Trump, where regularly there seemed to have been problems and general incompetencies, I think ironically it might not have been that surprising, and it might not have garnered this kind of attention and criticism, because it would have been consistent. This is an inconsistent message, and as a result, it has longer staying power.
Has anyone seen Vice President Harris?
I have not. Have you?
No, not in weeks and weeks and months and months. That has been a very, very quiet office.
Yeah, I mean, well, she's fixing immigration, right? You know, I do think, I mean, in the administration's defense, I know you're shocked to hear those words come out of my mouth. In the administration's defense, I do think that they're dealing with and juggling multiple crises on multiple fronts. That's not an excuse.
I think on the posting,
but
I think
you
on
know,
the
not seeing her could be part of that.
I think on the posting for president on Indeed, it does say you have to be able to handle multiple job priorities simultaneously. It is a complex job. Last but not least, it appears that the Biden administration is getting more active on the response to the Delta variant, announcing booster shots for the vaccine, as well as a number of other initiatives. Will we see more from the Biden administration that had been very quiet for many weeks? Seemed to be actually a lot of public health experts were sort of asking where they were, especially as data was coming out of places like Israel that said, you need a booster. You need to get much more aggressive on this variant. Is he going to leverage this to change the storyline from Afghanistan, to take on Republican leaders like Abbott and DeSantis, and try and step up the American response to what appears to be a significant surge emerging?
I think so, and I think that part of it will obviously be to try and demonstrate a high level of competence in the face of Afghanistan, but part of it is also because the experts suggest that within the next week or two, we could see more than 200,000 new cases every day and 1,000 deaths a day. Allowing state governors to make these decisions, allowing state governors to undermine what's happening at the local level is just no longer acceptable. The virus is surging out of control, and the science suggests that it needs to be tamped down, and we know how to do it. So I would not be surprised if the federal government, not only Joe Biden, but also HHS and various agencies, come together and really start cracking down. I mean, I can say on a personal note, my mother, who's immunocompromised, was eligible this weekend to get the third booster shot. And so she went and she got it. And that had been the only shot administered that day at CVS.
Wow.
Right? Like, this is a problem. And, you know, we've reached a point in time where the carrots aren't working. It's time for the sticks, and make those sticks federal.
Yeah, in the high day in Rhode Island was around 4,600 vaccinations in a single day, and now it's running around 400, 500 daily. And we're at about adults who are eligible around just, I think, under 70% vaccinated.
The one piece of good news that I saw this morning was polling data over the course of the last few days that suggests that about now 70% of Americans support mask mandates, and almost that many support vaccination requirements. And so, you know, if people are not going to take care of themselves and take care of their fellow citizens on their own, then it's time for the government to require it, because otherwise we're not going to have citizens.
Yeah. Listen, Professor, as always, thank you so much for taking the time. This was incredibly insightful for everybody who's trying to sort of unpack the complexity of what's going on in American foreign policy, and greatly appreciate you joining us today. For everybody else, we'll have Dr. Fine on at 1:30 on all the numbers. The transmission rate as of yesterday, remember the action level is 100 cases per 100,000 population in a 7-day period. Yesterday the number was 173 per 100,000. So nearly double the action level here in the state of Rhode Island. The governor has not issued any mandates, has not issued any masking for schools. That's becoming a political football. We'll see much more on that over the next few weeks, but everybody stay tuned. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, go do it. No more excuses. Be safe, and thanks again, Professor Lawless.